And I also appreciate the value that actually we do this by Zoom rather than the challenges of being necessarily in the one room. So, so be it as it may, that's where we stand and or sit, I suppose. And it's great to be here for my first meeting. I think it's appropriate for me just to express my satisfaction to both the elected members, but also governments for their confidence in engaging me, and you have all made me feel very welcome. Obviously, I very much enjoyed the meeting last week when I was impressed with the thoroughness with which everybody looked through the statement of service performance. A chance to do that next week through the financials, which reflected, amongst other things, the care and attention that the council as a whole provides to its external transparency, and I was very much encouraged by that. I do appreciate that. But look, to the work of the day, and I wonder if it's appropriate, more than appropriate, if I was to actually start with the karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru. Whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia makina kina ki uta. Kia mataratara ki tai. E hi ake ana te atakura. He tio, he huka, he hohu, ti he Māori ora. The promise of a glorious day. Well, hopefully an audit committee is a glorious day, but you might care to give me some views on that by the end of it. So it's tremendous to be able to start out with a karakia in Te Reo week, and I hope I did justice to that. Thank you. Can't do that. Do we have any apologies, Hetty, that we have been notified of? None, so we can move on from that. Do we have any issues around interest declarations for the matters that are on us? No, we can keep moving then. Actually, I just realised, sorry, and the good advice that I've been given here, I just need to check with Hetty that the rules actually about using Zoom. I can either take your questions by way of the little golden hand that you can put up on Zoom, or by waving. What is the normal protocol here for council meetings? Raising the hand, the golden hand. So if you could use that, please, when we get into that, we will do it. For the ease of the procedure, I will put all motions unless somebody is seeking to make an amendment, for which obviously I will seek a seconder. Again, Hetty, when it comes to voting, is it on voice, or do we have to go through the roll? Okay, so within the reaction box, you've got the green tick. So when it comes to a vote, if you're for, could you please put up the wee green tick? And if you are against, well, I probably drink the red one. Okay, there's the red one. There we go. So if that's okay with everybody, we will do that. And most importantly, at 10:30, we'll take a short break again as we go through the morning's procedure. Sorry about that. I was a wee bit naughty and not doing the housekeeping notes before we got down to it. So we've dealt with apologies, no conflicts. Can we please move to the confirmation of the minutes of the Kāwai Māhirahira Audit and Risk Committee meeting held on the 3rd of August. Look, obviously I wasn't there, but for ease of it, I will put that motion. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Jenny. I saw your hand up there. That'll be sufficient for me. Are there any matters of correction or accuracy that people would like to raise for Hetty at this stage? There being none, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Or sorry, green ticks up. Oh, sorry. Okay, that's a good point. I need to vote as well. That's a scary thing. I better learn it. Yeah, there we are. No. I just need to find out. Sorry, where's on this little screen? Where is it? I
seconded it, Sean.
Sorry, my mistake. There we go. It's carried. Sorry, those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Right, I'd forgotten. This is not normal for a chair to have to show their hands. It's the way it goes. Okay, so I'll just get rid of that. Rightio, if we could just remove the green ticks. Items not on the agenda. I have asked Stephen and Max at an appropriate stage to just give us an update on the process around the annual report and the annual audit. I presume that we will take it at some appropriate stage. Stephen, you had a suggestion for when you might cover that. Stephen? I think you're there somewhere.
Morning, everybody. Yes, we thought we could do that as part of the report on internal audit activities for the year. It's broadly connected with our auditing process, so that's probably the best place to mention that.
So I didn't quite, I was just turning up my volume. When was that, sorry, Stephen?
What part of the agenda?
Yep.
It's actually the item after the first one. 2.2.
2.2? Brilliant, thank you. So we'll include a verbal update. Well, I'd like to propose that we include a verbal update on the annual report at that point. I haven't been advised of any other matters. I will just move that we accept that as a verbal update under item 2.2. Do I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Roy. All those in favour, please say aye. Back to those reaction things, thank you. And those against. I think I can say that that was carried. Thank you very much. Right, we can just move to public participation. I haven't been informed of any person wishing to make a public presentation. So we can move on to general business. So, given I'm dealing with two things, item 2, health and safety report. Now, my apologies to presenters. Obviously, I'm in a massive learning curve to, well, it would be nice to meet in person, but to also remember names. So if you could just help me when it's your turn to come in and do your piece. But it's Jace, is that correct? That is. Oh, Meredith. Sorry, Meredith. Great to have you, Meredith. Here, nice to meet you by Zoom. And look forward to your report. Any key points you'd like to make, and then I'll open up for discussion. Thank you.
Morena, Chair, and the rest of Audit and Risk Subcommittee. With me today in the room next to you, actually, so we're not too far apart, is two other co-presenters. We have Jace Yorston, who's our security manager. To my right, sorry, our meeting rooms are not set up for Zoom. And I have Janine Megson, who is a senior health and safety advisor, who have kindly both stepped in while we are waiting our new health, safety and security manager, who starts on Monday. And that's Wendy Henderson, that many of you know, our operations manager from Park Sports and Recreation. So what we do normally do is just go through the key points, because we do take the report as read. And as you said, Chair, we do then take questions. So I will hand over first to Jace to go through those key points, and we'll answer any questions from that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Meredith. Thank you. Welcome, Jace.
Thank you. So the key points this year is we'd like to bring to everyone's attention that obviously the same period last year we were under lockdown. So there will be a lower skew towards the numbers if you're looking to reference from them from last year. Our leading indicators in section 1 are consistent, and we would like to see them going. We want to see growth for the next one coming forward. That's the main issue for that one. Looking into our critical risk observations, we can see quite a heavy indication for low and quite large for moderate compared to extreme and high, which is really, really good. It shows that we've got the processes and conversations in place so that we can intercede and have things being looked after before it occurs rather than after. And our lagging indicators, I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention the discrepancy or apparent discrepancy between the claim cost to date between this period last year and this period. There were a couple of high claims costs last period that have been resolved or passed back to ACC, which is why we're back to a normal value or a more respectable value that we're expecting in that sort of category. In terms of the security data, down the bottom with the data not available, that's not available because we weren't tracking those at this time last year. Next report going forward, I think we're almost on track. We've got the data being stored from 12 months ago, so we can start looking at comparisons. Overall, though, in terms of that from a security point of view, sorry, again, I'm a security specialist, so it's my field. We are seeing an increase across council in security-related events, and that's in line with national increases as well, which the stresses, the complexities, and the additional pressures put on everyone by COVID and by the consistency of the lockdown are increasing in our personal confrontation and our people's expectations, which is again also reflected in our report injury incidents, with personal confrontation still staying our highest risk, but closely followed by the manual handling and then hazards that are out of our direct control, which are just general life issues that are reported through to us. Injury type breakdown, we're seeing a stable proportion of the reporting associated with pain and discomfort, which is again a big driver of the health, safety and security team to get people reporting early. So we're getting those pain and discomfort in before they become an actual injury, which is really, really good for forward drive and getting people able to report to us. And then yet again, so the information presented for this time period is almost all pre-lockdown. So it is consistently higher than previously because the last year had the lockdown included, and we also had a little bit of a spike just before. So it flows through and in for the year to date. Looking at that, compared to the last report, there were slightly more high and potential near-miss incidents to be reported. They're all in the table there. Most, if not all, have been addressed or dealt with or are under action as it sits. Any questions?
Brilliant. Thank you, Jace. Thank you, Meredith, for a fulsome report. So look, I firstly would like to reflect that for any risk committee around the country, this has got to be one of the primary risk concerns near the top of the list. So I'm very open to having a reasonable time, a lot of discussion here. And it looks like, Jenny, you've got your hand up first. Can you ask your question, please?
Thanks, Bruce. Kia ora, team. I just had a question about the critical risk observations that are in the report. I think it's the first time we've seen that included in the reporting. And it would be great to have a bit more information about what's involved in a critical risk observation, and also then what I would note is that all three of them basically said that there was partial assurance around the controls. So it would be useful to understand what that means in practice, and how we're responding to that.
So I'll respond to that, Janine. I'm not sure what the previous one looked like. We were told to put the information in. It has been done since January. What we're doing this year was a program that Gareth had put in place, the previous manager, that we have our critical risks for council, and they had bow ties where they set upon controls for the critical risks, but had never been tested or looked at if they were working or not. So what I've been doing this year is every month taking a critical risk, going out into the business, and then asking the questions or observing if the controls are working or not. So a lot of the controls, and there's some of the we've got even extra controls while visiting that have been we'll be adding on to. So it's just, so this is a trial run, and then comparing it next year as to where we were in the business with the controls that were put in place after that bow tie. And then, so it's just, if that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. And then I guess just it would be good to understand why there was only partial assurance and how we're going to be following that up to make sure that we get better next time.
So the partial would be because not everything was in place, or it's still becoming being put in place, or courses still needed to be done, or a type of equipment was still going to be bought, or surveys were going out for seawalls, or that was still being done, type of thing. So that's why it's not 100% in place, but it's partially there.
So Councillor Condi, where we have done bow tie assessments, there's an action plan that comes out of those. And of course, the action plan takes a number of months to fulfill. So we're just making sure that we continue to stay on top of it and report our progress against those actions for each of the critical risks.
Thanks, team.
Thank you. Iona, I think you're next, please.
Thank you. I've got a few questions, so maybe I'll just ask three and then someone else could have a turn. And sorry, it's just a bit tricky flicking between Diligent and the screen. And it's good that Sarah's here. Just looking at the elected member obligations, I'm just wondering, apart from the fact we need to do some more site visits, whether there's anything else we need to do to meet our obligations. And obviously COVID's just made this a bit tricky to have site visits at the moment.
Morena, Councillor Kennett. I think we talked about elected member obligations last meeting as well, that ideally we would refresh some of the training for our elected members so that we can also enable you to participate more as officers under the Act, and we're continuing to look at that in conjunction with Democracy Services. In this instance, we have said, I think, is it one observation per councillor per year, totaling, of course, 15 should suffice, with ELT having to do, I think, 2 or 3. So, who are also deemed as officers under that Act in this instance. So at this stage, we're happy with how this is tracking, but of course, the more that we can get our elected members out, the better. There's often quite a lot of conflicts with meetings, so rescheduling has to occur quite a bit. But our staff really enjoy also having the elected members come out and ask questions around health and safety. It's a critical part of our culture as well. So we do highly recommend that where we can fit in our elected members, that we make that happen.
Okay. And
Diana, could I just be rude and jump in there, please? Because thank you for raising this question. I was going to bring it up last, at the very least. Were we comfortable that we were meeting our due diligence obligations? And Meredith, thank you. I'm comfortable about what I see here, but I would just want to signal, I know that I do think we should be doing more. It strikes me that, for instance, the first one we've had a workshop once in this triennium. I would think that probably as elected members and as officers, there should be some more being done. That's not inherent criticism, by the way, of what we're doing here. We're focusing on this. But again, taking Meredith's point about subject to timing, availability, workshop time, etc., I wonder whether, in fact, there should be some more being done. But we'll pick this one up as we go forward. So thank you for your very good question, Iona.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. And sorry, Meredith, if I forgot the last conversation, but that was absolutely my point, that we'd had a workshop in 2019. So that is great. Thank you. That's a good answer. Now, I'm just looking at page 16, partial around seawalls. Sorry, it is quite tricky flicking, but I just wonder if we are making enough progress around our seawalls, because that's obviously critical in terms of climate change. I'm just having a look. So when it says the asset failure, it says level of assurance is partial. I'm just wondering when we're going to get a higher level of assurance.
We'd have to work through with the area that is undertaking that work. So I can't provide you a response right now, Councillor, sorry.
Okay. So next question.
I do know they're busy with a 100-year event upgrade, but that's why I said partial, because they're still busy with the audit around that and getting everything in place, and that's why I put partial there.
Okay, and obviously we're reviewing how often those events happen now. Right, next question. The number of work days lost, I'm just wondering, sorry, I don't think I heard an explanation about why there was quite a difference. So there was 161 last year, 15 this year, which obviously it's a good result. Was there anything different that you did to improve that?
So that same period last year was during lockdown. So there would have been a large number of people taking extra time off during that space.
So lockdown was April last year. Sorry, remind me, it was April, wasn't it?
April to June.
Yeah, okay. So
and there was another one a little bit later. So there was some time period in there. So that was quite large for them.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, just because it went through to August, I was just wondering. And just last point for now, can I just make a plea for plenty of plain English? I don't know if anyone read Dave Armstrong's satiric column yesterday, but it was just a reminder about we don't need to bring our we don't need to make a sentence more complex than it is. There was something about, you know, avoiding severity of an incident or something, and I think we just need to just say in very simple language. Okay, so that's enough from me for now. Bruce, if I could go back on the list later. Thank you.
Thank you, Iana. Sarah, I think you've got your hand up, please. Deputy Mayor Sarah, your turn, please. You're muted. No? Sarah, you do have your hand up, but you're muted if you're trying to talk with us.
Yeah, look, I'm really, really sorry. I'm just trying to take part from a not so ideal situation. I'm going to keep it really quick. I can't be at all the meeting. But I read the report with a little bit of concern. And my biggest question is, there were some things flagged in the agenda papers today, which seem to indicate we're not doing as well as we should be in some areas. And my biggest question is, what is our plan to actually improve on some of the things that are raised in the reports? And how can councillors have assurance that things are being addressed? And it may have already been raised by other members.
Deputy Mayor, do you have anything specific that you're referring to?
I think it's some of those health and safety risks, some of that controls, some of the stuff in perhaps a later paper on controls. It's kind of a little bit of a general question. If it's too general, then I don't expect an answer.
Yeah, so one of the things that is flagged in the first report is the fact that we have adopted a maturity framework for health and safety, and we are resourcing our team up to go from 8 FTE to 18 over the next 18 months, which will support the maturity and capability uplift in the organisation. Other than that, of course, we're always on a continuous improvement journey, and we are looking to improve the reporting. So you'll be seeing a lot more of the lead indicators, which show that we're trying to get in front of incidents before they happen. But equally, we're also very proud of how many people are reporting incidents. So we do have to be careful when we're seeing an increase of things like reporting that we're not putting a lens on it that therefore means that things are getting worse. What it could potentially also mean is that the culture is improving around reporting and that people feel comfortable and safe to do so.
Yeah, and actually I do want to pay, give you praise for the number of people that are taking part in the EAP that we offer, and obviously some really good stuff happening in the staff space in terms of how people are feeling supported. Probably my concerns relate to later papers, actually, more about the audit, the deep dives that they did into certain areas of the organisation where, and it's probably not so much the health and safety paper, but yeah, it would be good for us to pick up on health and safety visits as well. And that's been really difficult because of COVID, of course, but yeah. Anyway, thank you.
Oh, sorry, I've just been, there we are, control, I've just been muted. How's that? I hadn't realised that. Thank you for that, Sarah. And Meredith, look, I appreciate the response. And again, Sarah, you've pointed us to a really critical part, which should be of concern. And I know it goes back to, believe it or not, our due diligence obligations, which is I'm appreciative that you've got a maturity assessment and a pathway. I think that's something from a risk committee perspective, getting the assurance. It would be good to walk that with you to understand ultimately what that pathway is and how we will see those indicators in greater assurance. Right, we've got a lineup of hands, and I think if I've seen it right, I think it's you, Laurie, then Jenny, and then Iona. Thank you.
Kia ora, Bruce, and no mai haere mai. Good to have you here. My question is around the personal confrontation risks for our team. I do tend to stay on this one, but I just want to know how our team are bearing up and how we are supporting them. And if they are, facing an increase in personal confrontation, how are they managing that themselves in order to maintain their own well-being?
So it is something that we've got a big focus on. It's part of the security maturity uplift, which we're doing in conjunction with the health and safety one as well, that we're providing staff with all of the tools that we can. So we give them the support from their direct managers, we give them the support from the EAP and the other internal opportunities and systems we've got. And we're also at the point now where we're literally just done a review on our lone worker systems, which is one of the devices that we put into place for our staff that are either working by themselves or working remotely, to provide them some assurance that if they need help, they can call for help. We're also redesigning and rethinking about how we build our venues. So we're providing safe spaces for our staff. In particular, we've just done Te Wahi Awhina, and we built a safe room into that space so that if staff need to be safe, they can lock themselves into a room and stay safe. And that's a focus through the security maturity review that we're looking to bring across council, and we put into all new builds and all renovations of any builds. And in spaces where we're at risk, where we can make changes, we are making changes to provide that support to the staff. In terms of personal confrontation, we've also just, in about the last 4 months, revamped our personal confrontation training offering through the team. It used to be MAPA training. It's changed to a more custom-built New Zealand Wellington City Council modified system, so it relates directly to what we do. And we did that in conjunction with the training partners, and we also got our parking team to come into that because they do a lot of work looking after their people on the field. So we wanted to touch into the skill set that they've got and bring that in for our other staff, our library staff, our call centre staff. So it's about giving them all of the support we can, and it's also about looking for different ways to try and support them as well, in places where we can build, or we can give them electronic devices, or we can give them other choices. Like, I know our parking wardens, when they have any close proximity to a confrontational system, they get pulled back into the office to have a debrief and to de-stress before they go back out, or they go home for the day. So people aren't expected to just carry on when an event like that happens.
If I might add, Councillor Foon, we're very clear not to normalise poor behaviour and through personal confrontation. We do take it very seriously. And with going back into alert level 2, noting the likelihood that some members of the public will be unhappy about being required to wear masks into our facilities and being required to scan in, we have put additional security in place. So that as public behaviour becomes more acceptable in the norm and they get used to it, then our staff aren't required themselves to directly deal with that until such time as it has improved and they understand that this is just the way things are right now about wearing masks, etc.
Bruce, he pātai taku anō, which is, I have another question. So just on that, I think particularly around the parking scenario at the moment, I just want to recheck we feel like we've got all the checks and balances to support the staff, but also if it needs to be escalated to make a change, that there is the pathway and the confidence to be able to do that.
I believe that we've got that in place, Councillor. I've been a party and supported the comms that have gone through to Kevin Black and his team, literally saying that the power resides with him and the team. You know, do what you need to do to be safe, feel safe, and to do what you can do, and make it work for our staff. The focus has been quite clearly, from what I've read, that the focus is on our parking wardens before doing the job, and the job is secondary to their welfare.
That said, Councillor Phone, obviously when there are articles or social media on our parking officers, they do note an increase of poor behaviour towards them on the street. So we were very mindful of that situation in level 3. And we were prepared to pull them off the street if it had got worse. We're also having to monitor social media carefully because they, as you know, are often the subject of a lot of hate speech.
So can I ask for a special focus on this area? You know, just that we really get it highlighted and that, you know, we're interested and want to make sure that the team are supported. And I know I'm not part of this committee, but I'm very concerned about this. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Laurie. Appreciate your question. I think Jenny next, please.
Thank you. Meredith, in the paper and in one of your answers before, you were talking about the health and safety and security team are getting bigger. I think you said going from 8 to 18 FTE. And that was in response to a review. Can you just very quickly tell us a bit more about basically what that upskilling is designed to do, what those new roles are going to be, and how you see that helping to improve our health and safety?
Sure. It was led by our previous health and safety manager, Gareth June, prior to his departure. And this was after we had an external audit done that we've talked to you about previously, and where it showed some gaps that we needed to concentrate on around uplift and those high risk areas within the council that needed greater attention or support. So we already have a number of roles that sit within business units that so they were decentralised, and part of that FTE is stopping that dotted line and making it a block line. So it's not that it's all brand new people, but we're definitely making sure that we bring those roles in and we work through those individuals to consult on them about that change in reporting line as well. So it's not entirely finished, so I won't go into too much detail on that. So the key areas where we have done a risk matrix on the high risk exposure areas, for example, where we have contract management or parking, for example, then we will have senior health and safety advisors that are partnering with that business unit to support them to uplift and ensure that the systems and processes are in place to continue to keep them safe. But it really is just about maturity and capability uplift of the organisation. So I'm also very aware this is, I've had a number of health and safety teams under me in the past that the team itself can't be health and safety for the organisation. Everyone needs to be doing this, and we need to support managers and their capability uplift and knowledge and empower our staff as well, which is also, of course, under the Act. So while we are increasing FTE, that is to ensure that we have sufficient advice in place and oversight of the systems that we are also continually looking at and reviewing. And there will be a work plan that is coming out against the health and safety maturity framework that we've talked about a couple of meetings now. So that will come to you so you can look at that. And that's also to reference back to you, Chair, around your question on that. So we just have to wait for the new Health, Safety and Security Manager to come in. The team have done a marvellous job holding the fort. But as you can imagine, it's quite hard to continue to progress without that role in place. And also with COVID having happened again.
It's got a lot to blame for, hasn't it? Thank you for that. Iona.
Thank you. Meredith, can I just ask for a bit more information on the concussion incident of one of our lifeguards and also the dog biting incident? I can see why maybe the manager didn't think that this person needed any attention, but to then report the next day that they couldn't go into work, were dizzy. I'm just wondering if we have a stricter policy around concussion, and also with the dog biting incident, was there any consequence around that? Because it's obviously not good.
When you say consequence, you're referring to
the owner,
what?
Hopefully
Sorry.
not the dog. The owner.
Oh, the dog. I will pass you over to Janine for that. Sorry, my laptop fell off.
So in regards to the concussion, they did, the team leader did look at the staff member, and they did all the tests that they would do when a concussion or a head smack on the head did happen, and everything was fine. And the staff member herself did not want to go to the doctor, but did start feeling ill afterwards and let her team leader know, and that's why they went to the doctor the next day. They, even with any person at the pools, if they knock their head, there's certain tests that they do because of the first aid that they administer, and they did all that at that stage.
So my question really was just whether there was any reflection on that, given that then the person needed medical attention.
We'll come back to you on that, councillor.
Okay. And
the dog bite one, yeah. The animal control did get in contact with the owner. I just haven't had any feedback on what was decided in regards to the dog bite. The person itself that was bitten, they're fine. Okay.
Still, we want to be pretty clear on that one. And Meredith, look, the more substantial question is around Frank Kitts Park slide. And I just want to reflect on my own performance there, because I saw there was a hole. We basically put some plastic wiring on a platform far from the ground. It was there for a very long time, and I should have done something about it. But I guess I understand it's quite complex, but we know now that there were quite a few incidences of children breaking their legs or having, quite serious accidents. And I guess just the question is to ask, what have we learned from that? And are our playgrounds safe enough? And will we act quicker next time? Because I would have thought after one incident, we would need to take action. That's pretty scary for under 5 to be having, a bone broken.
So we talked about this at the Health, Safety and Steering Group in our previous meeting, where the latest incident was reported to us. And in our risk manager, all of the ones that are referred to in the article, we don't have a record of those. So so for us, we were talking about, I believe, 2 or 3 over a 5-year period, 5-month period. So it had escalated. The slide itself at the time, we first assessed whether or not we shut it down based on the one incident, because we were only looking at that one incident at that time. And it was decided to put signage up instead where there was already signage, but then now with a 6-year age limit, so that those smaller children weren't supposed to be using the slide. Unfortunately, the signage wasn't sufficient, and another incident happened where a small child was allowed onto the slide and did break their leg. So at that point, it triggered us to recommend to have the slide decommissioned. I can say that that the slide is actually up to New Zealand standards, and so therefore there was no reason for us to think that it was faulty in itself, because it meets the standard. Whether or not New Zealand adopts the European standards about playgrounds, and it would still have been up to that standard, I can't say that would be a PSR answer, but I suspect the European standards are probably a little bit more robust from what I understand from some initial conversation.
Okay, but that's reassuring that it did meet standard. But what about the plastic wiring on the, when you sort of walk up to the first
So,
floor?
what if I can just jump in here? I think this is really important, and I certainly saw the public nature of it. I just wonder whether we're getting into too much detail.
Yeah.
We need to go a wee bit higher.
Yeah, Bruce, yeah, I appreciate that. But I guess just given that it was high profile and it went on for some years, I guess it is about just reflecting on whether our practice is good. So maybe if you could get back to me about that. But that was quite a lot of instances. So thank you.
Thank you, Ayana. Andy, I think you're on the line. You've got a question you'd like, please. No? Oh, well done, Andy.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, so I'm muted, etc. I thought Sarah was ahead of me in my screen. Just a quick question, which is just Meredith, 8 to 80 people, 8 to 18, not 8 to 80. You can just walk us through how that works financially. The number of people you got involved in doing the health and safety bit, yeah.
Oh, right, yes. As I said, it's not a full additional team that we're having to recruit in. So some of the roles are already just coming in from parts of the organisation. So it will happen over an 18-month period. So we have built that into the budget, and we will fund it through organisational savings.
I guess I am interested. I know it's an organisational thing, but we also sign off budgets. So I'm interested in knowing a little bit more because it's quite a lot of people.
I wonder if they can be.
They can do that offline.
Get back to Barbara.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good question because I think actually we all need to reflect on, and I know I probably tried to limit the amount of detail we got into, but it does reflect that actually this is a key risk, and the report shows it's not just staff, it's also public that we're dealing with here, and that actually we are trying to look at what is, for us, I would suggest a high risk, and yet what is a commensurate response. So it's not without reason that we also understand the cost. So look, it's a good question. I think again that's something that we could probably deal with.
I guess there's also a degree, Bruce, that it relates to a later paper. So
agreed.
In terms of risks, yep,
we'll get there. That's great.
Thank you.
Okay, look, I'm trying to wrap up this. To be honest, I think we've had a fair crack, but I think we still have 2 questions to go. I see Sarah, you have your hand up, and then Jenny. Sarah, are you still there, or is that a legacy hand? No, it's got. Jenny, can we take yours, and perhaps Sarah can come free if she wants to unmute.
It was just a quick follow-up on the slide from Frankett's Playground, and just wondering, are we reflecting on other slides that we might have in other playgrounds around the city that are similar? Essentially, do we need to respond to other assets around the city? I'm sure that there's a slide in one of the playgrounds in Tawa that's a similar size, height, whatever. So are we taking it beyond that specific site?
I'll refer back to Paul Andrews and come back to you, Councillor Conde. I know that all of our assets do meet the New Zealand standards. It was the curve in this particular slide that the children were putting their feet out to stop themselves from going down so quickly, and they were getting caught in the railing. So that's when their little legs bent backwards, unfortunately. So a lot of our parks are more modern.
Yeah, we could pick it up tomorrow at Finance and Performance, because I'm sure there are other councils will be interested.
Thank you, Jenny. Sarah, I can see you now, at least your face. Do you want to ask your question?
No, I haven't got any other questions. I'm just, I can't see how to lower my hand. So from now on, I'm just a participant listening, not participating. Thank you anyway.
It looks like we've got rid of your hand for you. So there we go, Sarah.
Thank you.
All things are possible around this place. It's great. Okay, so look, that's been a very useful discussion, and I do appreciate all contributions, including Meredith, your team as well, because again, this reflects the importance which we need to devote pretty regularly, quarterly, in our reporting. So look, what I'd like to do, if that's appropriate, is move to the resolution, but just in doing that, I want to come back to only your good point. I wanted to have lots of questions because this is part of due diligence. This is part of our meeting our responsibility along clearly with Barbara, and I've probably ELT as well in terms of meeting quite a strict and high threshold in terms of obligation. And I think we're wanting to reflect and go back to it that there are some structural things from a systems perspective here that are really important. So Meredith, as I said, if we can walk the journey with you when you've got your work plan through to understand that maturity development arc, that would be superb as well, because actually that's probably one of the more critical things. And also the point in due diligence that Meredith, you have raised, which is actually about individual officers understanding and gaining a personal understanding of both the rules, if I can call it that, but also verification that what we understand to be the system is actually in place. Could I move to the recommendations, please, at this stage? I will just see if I can find the right ones. They are that we receive the information we recommend to the Paroro Tahua Finance and Performance Audit Committee that they receive the information. Can I just check, please, because I think this is reasonably important. One of the issues of our committee is we should be providing assurance to the rest of your elected member colleagues that we have risk managed well. One of the things, particularly around health and safety, is actually the information value of what we have here. I just want to check, Eddie, that in terms of that second recommendation, that means the Finance Committee, and I would hope ultimately full council, would have access to the full suite of papers we have rather than just our recommendation. Okay, brilliant, right, so that's good. Thank you for that. I just want to be comforted by that in passing this recommendation, the subsequent committees and I would hope full council get to see the full information because again, they are officers as well. So with that, I'll put those two motions. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Jenny. I can see your hand. That's brilliant. So I will put the motion. Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favour, please say aye or put their green ticks up. Oh, okay, rightio. So thank you. I just got to hold it there so Heidi can get a screenshot of us all with our voting intentions. Those against, you better make certain you know how to get rid of your reaction. Those against, you just get, if you have voted for it, could I just make certain that you unreact so that we can take any that would vote against it? Can I just check? Sean, Linda, Jenny, Andy, are you voting against the motion? Otherwise, you need to get rid of your green tick. You'll leave the green tick and you'll go with the red. Okay, righty.
Yeah, there's a red cross that'll come up
Thank you.
As an alternative reaction.
My mistake.
All good.
Getting there, aren't we? Okay, absolutely. So I actually am going to declare that the motion was, or the motions were carried because I think we've got ourselves there. Thank you for that. Appreciate that. Right, if we could move then, please, to the next item, which is the internal audit reporting for the year. Again, another comprehensive report, which I'm greatly appreciative of. Stephen, probably in your hands and your staff, or indeed Richard.
Thanks, Bruce. Look, it's this report looks at the overall results from the year in terms of the work program that was signed off by this committee last year in terms of the work program, and it also looks at our overall assessment of our internal control system based on that system. So I'm going to hand over to Rich and one of his staff to take us through.
Diane. Somebody's got a bit of noise in the background there, which is affecting us, please. If you could just check and mute if you don't need to be talking. Thank you, Richard. In your hands, buddy.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Kia ora, councillors. Stephen said it, this reports back on the main activity of the internal audit team, which reports up to me. There's 4 parts to the paper. The first is a controls assessment, which complements the work done by Audit New Zealand. Audit New Zealand rates our control environment as effective. There's a self-assessment of the internal audit function, and you'll see on page 33 that they're well appreciated by the teams that they've audited during the year. There's mention of the integrity activities that have happened during the year, and there's a summary of the internal audits that have taken place. We track the recommendations from those audits and report back to this committee regularly. I think just one thing to bring to the subcommittee's attention, Councillor Deputy Mayor's question about the controls, I think would have been referring to the spider chart on page 33, the control activities that take place there. We found, as Audit New Zealand have, that our control environment is effective. It could be more effective if we were to move towards a good, and some of that would be refreshing our policies and procedures, which we are doing, and also some more management control assurance at the manager level, as opposed to the third tier assurance at our level. So my colleague Phyllis, who manages the assurance business integrity team, is here to answer some questions if you have them.
Great to have you here as well too, Phyllis. Thank you for that. Thank you, Richard. I'd like to open up for questions. Would folk like to raise any questions with the team about the internal audit activity? Yeah, Roy.
Hi, thank you very much, Richard. I was, again, as I mentioned in the past, quite surprised that there were only 4 internal audit arrangement engagements. I wonder, maybe to pass the same question, do you have enough people to do the work, and are you doing enough work? In which case you probably haven't got enough people. I got a bit concerned that those the 4 engagements were the only ones that you've done during the period.
Just for a bit of context, if I could answer that question to you, Chair. The last year's plan was approved in November because we lost some time around the delays around shutdown and COVID. So just for first, so that's the first context that was approved in November 2020. So it's about a 7-8 month plan. In terms of whether we are doing enough work, I guess we could always do more. I think what we're doing is focusing on where we think the higher risk areas are. And I think at this stage, we are comfortable that we are sufficiently resourced in the internal audit team. So if Richard or Stephen would like to add more to that.
Just to add that the plan approved for this year is more ambitious, and there are many more activities, both advisory and audit related. We also have luxury of one kind of additional staff member for a 2 or 3 month period, whilst another member is coming back from parental leave. So we have all the resources that we need to deliver this year's programme, and as you can see, we've delivered last year's.
Yeah, no, I see that. I've perhaps got a question. It may not be for you to answer, but are you doing enough based on the fact that the overall, the overview of the council's internal control system, the next appendix 2, shows that we've got quite a long way to go. The control activities are only initial. When the internal controls indicate that they're not flash, we seem to probably need to do more internal audit.
Again, if I can answer that question, our internal controls, yes, it does need improvement, and I think where the resource, to be honest, is best placed is within the business who are actually responsible for carrying out some of these activities. And there's quite a few initiatives going on in the organization. You just heard about health and safety and the work that's happening around that space. We have reported back around the improvements around program and project management. We're looking at procurement, contract management. So there's quite a lot of activities going on throughout the organization to improve and lift maturity of our processes and controls. I think my view is when there are wide organization-wide initiatives around how we improve controls, more audits doesn't necessarily improve the situation, because we know what the risks are, we know what the issues are, and I think this is just give management a bit of an opportunity to embed some of the things that are already underway.
Okay, another question. The recommendation, receive this information. Receive the information, that's the end of it. Doesn't it go up the line into the whatever the next committee is called? Diane's chair of that committee. Does that go further up the line, or does it just stop when we make the recommendation? Does anything else happen? It's this kind of so what question. No, nobody wants to answer.
Sorry, we're just getting ourselves unmuted. As Richard said, the actual recommendations for each audit are tracked and traced and reported back to this subcommittee, in terms of making sure that the recommendations that arise from each of these audits are actually implemented. In terms of finance and performance committee, unless there's a particular recommendation that would require the oversight, no, that wouldn't be reported separately up to finance and performance.
You can see the minutes of this meeting.
Sorry?
We are a subcommittee of that committee. Does that committee cite of the minutes of this committee's subcommittee's meetings?
Yes, but it's a question about whether any decisions were within the delegations to the subcommittee, as opposed to what needed to be reported up. And health and safety is an example of that, as is the annual report. So it's this particular one, unless there was something that required the attention of finance and performance, no, I wouldn't see that necessary.
Okay.
Thank you for that, Roy. Jenny, I think you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Bruce. First of all, Stephen, is Barbara in the room with you? I thought I saw her there earlier, and I've got a question that follows.
Yeah.
Hi, Barbara.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Just kind of an overview of this report. It kind of is saying, look, there's good pockets of performance, but there's areas where we're not doing so well. And there is a whole bunch of work in progress, which Phyllis has talked about: the project management office, the strategic asset management work, the procurement work, the health and safety work. I know there's lots of stuff happening across the organisation. Can you give us kind of an update on how you think that work is going, what the challenges that you're seeing, and when you think that we will start to see kind of the fruits of that labour, and when we'll start to see those things pay off in terms of improvement?
Thank you, Councillor Condi. Yes, this report is really indicative of a message that I've been giving to the council over the past year, and that is there is a lot of work to be done inside the organisation to lift our performance to the level that I would expect a high-performing organisation to be working at, and one that is capable of delivering on the significant program of work in front of us. So as you've listed some of the areas we're focused on, I would also add there is work to be done in building the capacity of the finance team. So it's not simply procurement, it's the oversight of significant projects and the establishment of our new PMO. We have a new procurement strategy, but we need to make sure we implement it satisfactorily. And of course, in an organisation of this size, there are a significant number of processes that drive the engine room that sit behind our service delivery, and we have to be careful about how we prioritise that work. The challenges in doing that work would be simply the interruption of the pandemic over the past year, and probably, to be fair, some of the other significant unexpected challenges that we've dealt with as a city and a country beyond pandemic. The pandemic itself, of course, creates some wider challenges in terms of project delivery and program delivery, but also our staff have had a lot of interruptions. We've also had a significant workload in seeing through the most complex long-term plan the city has ever dealt with. That took up an inordinate amount of time, and we did that in a very short time frame because we had to redo our entire annual plan as a result of the pandemic last year. So it's our ability to build capacity and capability to the level necessary to do what we're here to do. And one of the other challenges that organisations throughout the country are dealing with, but we're certainly seeing in the city of Wellington, is our ability to recruit people, to fill vacancies, and the competitive, very hot job market that is evident in Wellington at the moment, because we have a very busy public service competing with us for some scarce resource. We have strategies in place to deal with those things, and one of the things that I think is important for me to do is to also regularly talk about those challenges with you, so there are no surprises.
Thanks, Barbara. And I guess my follow-up to that is just how can this committee and governors, councillors more generally support you in making this work successful? Because I think as this committee receiving this report, we can all see that there's a lot of work to do. What's our bit?
I think if you have a high level of awareness of the amount of work that is going on inside the organisation, that is very useful for the executive leadership team and some of the leaders in the organisation, so that there is an understanding about how much we can do at short notice, and where there are ways in which we can work together to streamline some of the activity that takes us away from those core roles. Your level of awareness and the awareness of the council as a whole is very helpful to us, so that there is a mutual understanding about what is possible in any given situation. And we do tend to find that despite regular discussions about the amount of work we have to do here, that often we are given more. And I think that there will come a time where I have to say some prioritisation is necessary.
If I just jump in there, Jenny, thank you for that question. And actually, Roy, thank you for your question as well, and Barbara, your input, because I think this, again, also reflects something, and I like your question, Jenny, how can we support both, firstly, through understanding and recognising the challenge? And I'd like us to think, as a committee, as we go forward, that we do that, amongst other things, lockstep with Stephen and Richard. He has an assurance plan. I haven't read it yet, to be honest. That's part of my induction. But that's our chance for us to do a couple of things. One is to understand what work, or the nature of the work that's done, complemented by the internal audit plan. So, Roy, that for me would be, I hope, a chance for us to see that from a governance perspective, the right stuff is being focused on and with the right quantum. I would be very interested through the committee that we are then able to, Richard, understand and follow the nature of the recommendations. So, for instance, when I look at the procure to pay, it says there is a low understanding in the organisation about procure to pay and its processes. Well, hello, there's the biggest way in which we put money out the door. That should worry us. And actually, so raising our sights, hopefully, to the really key things, that then gives us a chance to talk with you, Barbara, about actually something like that, and then to understand what are the challenges and hopefully provide the support. So I'd be very keen that as we walk forward as a committee, that we join those things so we can keep an understanding of the visibility of the issues that you face, Barbara, and also provide the support. Got to get that all nobbled together, but I'm sure we can. As it probably has already been, but in a way in which I'd like us to keep refreshed in front of us as a committee. Okay, Jenny, did you have more questions, or will I move on to Iona?
I've got a couple of more specific questions, but go to someone else first.
Okay, Iona, welcome back. Your question, please.
Thanks, Bruce. And look, next time I might email my questions through, because I think we need to ask lots of questions, but it'll be more efficient. Barbara, can I just ask about language? When we refer to customers, I would rather it was residents. I'm a forced customer. I was just thinking, I've got to pay my dog registration. It's not really a customer relationship, it's a regulatory obligation. But I would prefer that we use that language. What's your thoughts on that?
Look, I think the language of customer is very important in the local authority, because while we are a major infrastructure body and a regulatory body, most of our workforce is actually engaged in delivering services to people every day in the city, and the ethic of customer focus and caring about the quality of experience that people have, I think, is a very important part of the role of a local authority. And yes, you're right, we have many different groups of customers that we can variously describe as citizens, residents, ratepayers, visitors. But I think the language of customer is very important for the reasons I convey.
So I get that, but we're also a monopoly, and there is no competition. So the customer cannot go somewhere else if they're dissatisfied with our performance. So, okay, anyway, that's
happy to discuss it with you, Iona.
Maybe another time. There's a big issue there. Now, can I just also ask Barbara, when we say we're at the core level, how does that compare to other councillors? So thanks, Jenny, for asking the question, because it's kind of like, look, we're a major public entity, and I guess I'm sorry that I haven't been on this committee that long. Why are we only at core if, this thinking surely should have been around for a couple of decades in terms of internal risk?
Apparently, Phyllis will be the ideal person to answer that question in terms of comparison.
Thanks, Phyllis.
Thank you, Councillor Pennant and Barbara. So I don't have the information or benchmarking information around how other councils are performing at this stage. Perhaps that's something if we can come back to you if we can find that. So I'm just not too sure at this stage. What other councils are doing or where they're rated.
Okay. Because obviously,
could I just add, Councillor Pennant, a lot of other councils don't impose this kind of assessment on themselves. I think if many of them did, they would find similar answers. So the results don't surprise me. The key now is that we have a benchmark from which we can improve.
Okay, that's great. And just the last thing, there was some reference to a conflict of interest over an encroachment, which just made me raise my eyebrow a little bit. And now it was found not to be there, but I just was curious. I presume that, Barbara, this is a question for you, that we don't have too many claims of conflict of interest with officers. That seems a bit odd.
I think Richard will be able to explain this.
Yeah, this was an isolated one. It was a conflict of interest that was alleged. A member of the help me out here, Phyllis. It was the consenting team. So we undertook that investigation because there was a suspicion of conflict. And in fact, I think the outcome was that it had been well managed. Is that correct, Phyllis?
Yeah, so the complaint was from a member of the public about, I think the applicant was a staff somewhere else in the organization, but the decision makers was within the council as well. But our investigation resulted in there wasn't any conflict. I think the public just thought that there might be, just because the applicant happened to be a member of Wellington City Council, a staff of Wellington City Council. So we looked into that and confirmed that there wasn't any conflict at all.
Okay, so I presume Richard and Phyllis that consenting staff are particularly fastidious about that sort of thing in terms of their personal interest. Okay, lovely. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Iona. Linda, welcome.
Hi. It's been a good discussion, and I think some of the others have covered over what I was looking to raise. But my question was, how do you actually measure whether past recommendations have been implemented and how long have they been outstanding? We don't get a sense of, say, the purchase to pay processes, you know, that was raised perhaps 5 years ago and is still to do. And I think it would be helpful for us to see, you know, what improvements have been implemented, what's still outstanding, and a timeline of how long that has been.
We do that regularly through this subcommittee, but not this time round, because look back. Phyllis's team tracks all those recommendations through to completion. Or
so I guess is that a table that could be included, which would give us confidence that, you know, while recommendations have been made and are required, they're actually being done.
I think we can give some very high level assurance. I think Phyllis and I spoke about this earlier in the week. The oldest is about just over a year old, the oldest open recommendation.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda, and it's a good point. We do have the table which does show high and medium.
That's the table I was referring to, but it didn't show how long outstanding. Yeah.
No, look, and I agree, and also if we reflect back on Roy, Barbara, and Jenny's prior discussion, to actually understand that we're focusing on the high risk, at least we're prioritising our resource, both our energies, but most particularly those of staff, which is reasonably important. Now, Jenny, did you have a concluding question you'd like to ask?
I had two sort of smaller questions. One was about there was an investigation looking at whether some of our internal controls were not actually in use. And I guess I'd just like to hear a bit more of a conversation about that. I guess that's the whole point of internal auditors, to go out and check that the controls we think are in place are actually being used in practice. But can you talk about that specific investigation?
So you're referring to, Councillor Condi, to the investigation around our reconciliations? Is that what you're referring to, just to clarify? Or just generally controls? That's correct.
Well, it was correct that I saw that we did the internal investigation into those daily reconciliations, but then I guess I had a broader question about how confident are we that controls we think are in place are actually being used?
Okay. Just the first part, the investigation around the reconciliations, that process is still underway. So if that's okay, I prefer not to speak too much about that. So that's underway. What I can say is that since then, we have looked at how we improve our processes around reconciliation, and those improvements have been implemented. So that's the first bit of your question. Just around controls not working as either intended or expected. I think from what we did during this year, one of the areas that we did look at, and which this committee has just discussed, was around the health and safety area. So that was, we look at the action plans for how we manage our top critical risks. And part of the challenge that we found that the BUs are having, or the business units were having, is to have good control information to know, to support their work. So it's not that we do not have good controls in place, it's that sometimes the controls either is different from what we expected, or it's not well documented, or it's just different. So part of that is having good control information, and part of it is just putting more assurance from the business areas to know that those controls that we are expecting are actually working. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question, Councillor Condi.
Thank you. And then just quickly, I noticed there was another note about gift declarations. And I know that this has come up in this committee before, where we've actually asked for us to look at whether the gift declarations amongst elected members are working as intended. But as far as I'm aware, that I haven't seen any follow-up on that. I'm just wondering if that is something I can look forward to.
We haven't, my team hasn't looked at elected member gift declaration process, so I can't quite speak to that at this stage.
Okay, well, it's just something that I know has come up at this committee, and Linda and Roy both couple of committee meetings ago, raised a question about whether we were actually doing that correctly at an elected member level. And I think it would be worth us following that up. It's a small thing, but I think it would be, given that it was raised previously in the committee, I think it would be worthwhile to know that it has been followed up.
Thanks, Councillor. We'll come back with some advice on that.
Thank you.
Report back.
It's one of those small areas that has high significance that we get it wrong. So, well, I think that goes back to my view that I think as a committee it would be good for us to understand, and we'll have the input. And I just have to be patient with the life cycle of the committee with both understanding the assurance plan and also the annual internal audit work program, because it gives us a chance to have a discussion with Barbara, Richard, and with Phyllis about where does the effort go for the year, and going right back to your point, boy, is it enough effort? So, so that's really good. Thank you for that. Just final sweep, no more questions. Sweet. Look, what I'd just like to reflect again, Phyllis, thank you for your report. It does reflect that actually good information generates good discussion, and hopefully insightful discussion, better insight into what's actually happening. So thank you for that. One of the points, and I'm just putting a wee marker here that I will be keen to come back to, in part is actually the last point you raised, Jenny, which is actually the integrity role. We've got, obviously, with the charter, a chance to affirm that as we go through with the charter, but actually the work in there becomes really important as well. And that's certainly an area that I would be keen to understand going forward. But at the moment, our task is to deal with the recommendation, which, Roy, right at the start you said simply is to receive. I would note with a slight sort of fig leaf covering over the consequences of this. At least I'm very grateful that Diane is with us as well for the committee, so she's hearing the conversation as well. So I will move that we receive the information. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Jenny. All those in favour, please.
Well, first, sorry, if I could just quickly say as well, just to give assurance that I'll speak to this as the Deputy Chair. I'm kind of like your representative of this committee when we go to Finance and Performance. So I'll also kind of be speaking to this conversation that we've had when we take it up to Finance and Performance tomorrow, just to give you that assurance.
Thank you, Jenny. Do appreciate that. And I should recognise that you all are in multiple roles. So that's tremendous. Okay, so we have the motion that it be received. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, they put their red cross up, please. It's carried. Oh, Eddie, have you got it? You've got a picture of us all. There we go. That's great. Thank you very much. Look, it's well past, and you're about to see that Robertson doesn't know how to time keep. We're past 10:30 when I was told we should have a break. It's 10 to 11 now. Could I invite you guys to go get your cup of tea, have a refreshment break, and could we recommence, please, at 11 o'clock on the dot? That would be very helpful. Thank you very much. I just suggest that you turn your video off. Don't leave the call, but turn your video off and put your mute on. And we look forward to seeing you folk back in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. I'll be signing out from now on, but it's been really interesting.
Bruce, can we do, it's Baz here, can we do the update on the annual report as soon as we get back from the little break?
Yeah, surely, mate. Hi there again. Sorry about that. It's got waylaid in the corridors, which is pleasant because I've met some old faces and colleagues, and that's great. But I do apologise that I am slightly late. And you can see that from a chairing perspective, I owe lots of chocolate fish. I asked the staff for an urgent item to be raised as part of the last item and forgot all about it. So Baz, I apologise for that, but Baz is just going to give us a quick update on the annual report process, and I think we're just going to invite after that our auditor Karen just to speak briefly, literally to basically say she's on the job, I think. So Baz, in your hands, please.
Thank you, Bruce. Good morning, everyone. The annual report program of work is on track and going well to schedule. Last week was our first workshop where we went through the SSPs, statements of service performance. They were handed over to audits on Monday. So audits had them for 3 days and are working their way through them. We get an update on the 20th next week, and so we'll be in a better position to give you a bit more information at your next workshop. Your next workshop is also next week. That's on the financials. They're also in audit at this point in time. So you'll see those coming through next week as well. Just quickly, there was quite a few questions asked last week at the workshop. We're just collating all those answers. We're nearly there, and they'll go out later this week. So you'll have them very, very shortly. And we'll also make sure that we'll have some staff on hand next week as well, just to deal with any of the questions that may arise from them. So everything's on track, going well, and we're still on schedule to deliver the annual report by 28th October. And I'll leave it there and I'll hand over to Karen.
Thank you, Baz. Just to confirm, that's 28th of October, right?
Correct.
Good. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's good news. And again, as I said yesterday, I said at the start of the meeting, I was very appreciative and impressed actually with the participation last week, Baz. Well done to you and your team for creating the good meeting. Hi, Karen. Welcome. One of the people that I saw in the corridors and got talking to. Karen, any sort of brief comments that you'd like to make for us at this stage, please?
Thank you, Bruce. Briefly, I agree. It's on track. We're doing okay at this early stage. And we've had all the information and cooperation from Wellington City, working remotely. Information's on a shared drive. It's going well.
Brilliant. I think that reflects one of the interesting things, even for us older auditors, that actually a lot of it's done by shared drive and electronically now. So for some of those that might have expected to see auditors floating around the building, that's less so now, as I understand, Karen. So yes. That's great. And we look forward to working with you as we go through the inevitable challenges of getting the report out on time. Look, I just would ask, and I ask this of all my auditors, that if there's anything recognising the pressure that's on the audit universe at the moment, which is not of your making, if there's anything that should impede that, as it has happened with one or two other councils around the country, any early warnings, heads up, we would appreciate, please, at the committee, let alone I'm sure Baz would as well, if you could give us any indications or risks. Otherwise, we look forward to things going on time. Any questions before I disclose off this verbal update for Baz or Karen? Being none, I would like to suggest that we just, I'm being slightly naughty here, we'll just accept that as part of the other item. We won't put through a separate motion if that's okay, Eddie. And we will move on to the next item, actually, which is, by the way, a really good report. Can I say well done, Wellington? This is probably the best legislative compliance report I've seen, and believe it or not, read it with great interest. So well done. But anyway, we better actually deal with it first, which is important. And Stephen, is it you or is it Phyllis who's taking this, leading this one off for us, please?
Phyllis can speak to this report, Chair. Thank you.
Kia koto again. So just really briefly, if I could highlight some aspects of this report. So this is a summary of managers' attestation towards their legislative responsibilities. And overall, the result is that based on those attestation is that they are effective. Compared to last year, we had a few more non-compliances reported, but from my perspective, I think that's actually a positive sign of improved reporting and more thoughtful responses about really whether we are complying with those various legislation. Just to highlight one of the things that we are thinking about for next year is to have more, just to work with the business to understand a little bit better about how we attest to some of the legislative responsibilities we have for Maori outcomes. So work is ongoing around that. Happy to take any questions from the council.
Thank you, Phyllis. That's very helpful and a reasonably clean report. Could I open up to questions to committee members, please? Yes, Jenny. Well, Jenny, you're on mute.
Thanks, Bruce. One of my questions is about compliance around the Land Transport Act, and just sort of trying to understand the kind of extent of this report. So, but for example, we had an audit done recently of the Island Bay Parade cycleway, and one of the things it found is that we painted parking boxes right up to the edges of driveways, which was not compliant with a land transport rule of some kind. I don't know exactly where it sits. It wasn't legislation, but it is kind of legislatively forced. And that they should have been a metre back as a minimum from the edge of the driveway. So I'm interested in kind of at that, really getting down to that kind of boots on the ground operational level. How do we keep track of that? Does this report even get down to that level? Just can you kind of tell me a bit about that?
So this report is based on managers' attestation, and no, it doesn't get down to that level of detail for specific projects or sites. What it does look at is whether we have good processes within our business areas around managing this risk. So what we expect would be, for example, in the land transport area, we expect the transport team to have good processes in place, good training, good QA, and as far as we can ascertain, yes, they do. So again, this is based on managers' attestation. We do a validation of some responses just to make sure that they are consistent, and that we also understand what managers are saying when they say, yes, they have confidence that their team are managing legislative compliance well. But yeah, it doesn't go down to that detail of specific sites or projects at all.
Thank you. And then I guess I was just interested in the non-compliance with the Public Records Act, just from the point of view of transparency and complying with the GLOMA and whatnot. I was just interested to know a bit more information about that and how we're going to address it.
Yeah. One of the requirements of the Public Records Act is that we have really good monitoring and reporting of organizational record keeping. The council is right now improving how we do that. We have good, we have a project in place to really look at how we improve, update. Trove is our document management system, so basically to update and improve the tools that we have so that we could really understand where all our information is kept. So it's not saying that we don't have good information or we're not keeping the information, it's just that we don't necessarily have an organization-wide view, and we don't necessarily do an organizational-wide monitoring or central reporting of any of that. Yeah.
Thank you, Jenny. Iona, and then Diane.
Thank you very much, Phyllis, and Bruce, great to hear that we are doing such a good job here. I guess I just raise my eyebrow a little bit at the level of lack of understanding of some legislation. Now, I would expect it where, we're trying to meet our te tiriti obligations, we're immature in that stage as an organisation, but there are some other things where, as regulator, I would expect a high degree of compliance. So I was just wondering if you could talk to that a little bit more.
Regarding the Treaty Act in particular?
No, just generally, when you look at the report about levels of understanding of legislation, so I'm just trying to find it, which page it is. So we've got 16% say understand the Act but not fully confident about sharing the knowledge. Yeah, I just would say that, that I would have expected for some areas that, that understanding would be really high, particularly where we've got very important regulatory functions.
Yeah. My take on this is that we do have a really high understanding. Managers say that they do have a high understanding. So 82% can really talk, and these are the managers, the tier 3s who are managing the teams and the technical advisors. So managers are responding that they have a really good understanding about the legislation, its key risks, and how it applies to the council. We do have 60% who say that they might not be fully confident. And what we're trying to get out of this question is not just a point yes or no, I understand or not, but how well they can express and talk about, they can understand the act in general, but can they talk about it and fully, explain the risk and its full implication to the organization. So it's kind of like a bit of a sense of, how deep their understanding is. So I would say that 60% do understand the act. So it's not that we have no understanding of the act. And again, I think this response is a reflection of a more thoughtful response. It's not just a yes or a no. And just because managers might attest that they don't, they might not be fully confident talking about it, this doesn't mean that we do not have technical experts sitting behind who are fully competent and be able to, ensure that we fully comply with the legislation.
Okay. Can I just have some reassurance that we take child safety extremely seriously? Yeah, I know that there was some sort of issue around retesting people, but just given the enormous amount of sexual and other kinds of abuse of children, that we are very high performing in this area.
That's the right to the Vulnerable Children Act response here, Iona, that you're referring to.
Yeah, well, we were just supposed to make sure that, that people were, rechecking the requirements for our workers, and just wanting to make sure that, just as a general point, that is given a significant amount of weight. Yep. Okay. Just that question has to be asked, given, and part of my background is that institutions have failed to keep children safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. We will follow up on all of this in 6 months, and of course there'll be another attestation round next year. But definitely this particular issue around rechecking our workers. So it's not that they haven't been checked, just to recheck it on a regular basis. That process is working. Yeah.
Okay, good. And the last question was, I laughed, whether we were meeting the requirements of Section 17A of the Local Government Act, which is highly political, right? And one, in my view, that we never really adhere to entirely seriously, just given that we, local councils have so many different functions. My question is around the consequences of not meeting the requirements of 17A.
Perhaps I could answer that, Iona. I guess I've been in other councils where there's been active programs of Section 17A reviews, but the way that we're doing that here is basically part of our activity management planning that precedes or feeds into the LTP, and we're going to look at how we kind of deliberately do that in time for the next LTP round. But in terms of the consequences, there isn't any specific consequence set out in the Local Government Act, and if you there is a requirement to do this every 6 years, and most councils have a kind of a rolling program of reviews. Now, there's a question about what actually sort of counts as a review, like the strategic review of waste that's being undertaken at the moment would probably qualify as one. So, the way that some councils do this is basically map existing pieces of work to this sort of program. But the reality is that given everything else that we have to do, it's about really prioritising what are the high areas, high priority areas, which one way or another we've got most of those things on our agenda for review through policy strategy reviews or more operational reviews that are already planned. But we are going to have a look at a more deliberate program that we can at least map, what we're actually doing in the organisation that would classify as a Section 17A review.
Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah, is Meredith still on the call? I was just a bit alarmed to see that there were some issues around holiday pay entitlement. So just it would be good if I could get a written answer to that we are meeting our obligations. Thank you.
Yeah, Meredith's no longer online, but we can follow that up.
Thank you, Anna. Diane, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, just a couple of questions, and it might also be for the subcommittee to think about. But how do you, through this ensuring that we're complying with legislation, where changes are required, in particular policy and strategies, how does this get fed into the work program of around our policy and strategy work at the appropriate level?
Perhaps I can answer that. Obviously, Richard's work that you're seeing here today, Richard's part of my wider leadership team, which obviously bears is responsible for running the strategy and policy work program. So we have regular discussions at our leadership meetings about where these things, where they fit. And, you know, there are deliberate conversations about the findings, for example, and what we've just been talking about, how that can drive priorities or improvements in the strategy and policy work program. So there is good dialogue.
Mm. And do you, would it be appropriate for this subcommittee to monitor progress at a 6-monthly stage? Because I know there's a number of actions, and according to this, you don't get to review that progress for another 12 months, presumably. And I just wonder whether from, you know, from the assurance perspective, that there should be perhaps a bit more frequent monitoring.
Thank you, Diane. That's a very good question. I was going to raise that, and I think it's actually also aligned with Iona's good question. Firstly, as a council, we are a creature of statute. It's a trite phrase, but it's unreal, and you can see it from this, whether it's our regulatory role, whether it's just complying with the Local Government Act or whatever, it's large. So I think actually some of the matters here are more equal than others. So, for instance, you know, I would like to suggest a check that actually for the Vulnerable Children Act, that actually what is in process is more equal than, say, have we done a Section 17A review? So it's about relative effort and where priorities should go, and indeed potentially that we as a committee should have some earlier satisfaction over some of these. So Phyllis, perhaps if I could leave it with you and Richard, you can get a sense. Firstly, thank you for the report, that indeed we are incredibly interested in this. Again, it raises a whole bunch of really good issues, but actually perhaps I could invite you to come back with some reflection on actually the prioritisation of action around these. It's very similar actually to Linda's question under the Internal Audit Report about recommendations, so that actually we can keep ourselves at the right level, but we can have some assurance that actually key matters here are being dealt with. Now, I want to reflect, that's a judgment call on the part of you and Richard, because as sure as not as much we focus on vulnerable children, something will get picked up that 17A hasn't been done. Now, that's probably only media embarrassment or something like that, but it becomes the cause célèbre. But we have to make a call, and I think I'm wanting to reflect here from personal experience, and indeed some of the question of the committee, that perhaps a sense of prioritisation and more regularity, which comes back to your point, Diane, would be valuable. So if I could leave that with your thinking, come back to us on, I would appreciate that, rather than waiting for another year. It would make sense.
Can I suggest that perhaps you might want to amend the recommendations that is the case? That you add a recommendation that's what happens, and then it's an easy way to track those actions. And that brings me to my just final point is, I noticed the recommendations was just receive the information, and I wonder whether that recommendation is, I suppose, full enough. You know, you can receive the information, but are you happy with the information? Are you, and it probably applies to the previous paper as well. So I don't have a firm view, but I just wondered whether the recommendations, perhaps with what Bruce was just suggesting, but certainly whether they need to, you know, be a bit fuller in terms of what the committee's actions are. It's not just receiving the information. It's, you know, it's actually noting it, or it's accepting, or it's whatever. But I just wanted to make that point.
I think we can pick that up in terms of the next reporting round and make them kind of more targeted and specific actions that we want support for, or get the committee to agree to. Yeah, we can do that.
I think it would also meet Roy's needs as well from the previous one as well, Roy. So hopefully that's useful. Diane, thank you for that. Because actually, if I could just give you one or two bits of my sense of concern, seeing this as the final comment. So look, I would reflect on what Iona said. Vulnerable children stuck out to me as a concern about it. And Phyllis, in your opening comments, you mentioned the Treaty of Waitangi Act, and again, I've got a level of ignorance about how we as a council respond to the obligations under the Act. But it worries me that it's just sort of hanging out there. So you've said you're doing something on that. And believe it or not, probably because I have a history degree, I don't know, I was interested about the Heritage New Zealand Te Aonga Act. And particularly given that, within our bounds, there are things that would be counter Te Aonga, and perhaps just some sense, are we not losing a grip on some of the things that we count culturally as valuable? Minor, perhaps, but I would just, given the nature of the response, that there is no specific action, it would be nice to know that either we don't have to take action because we're okay, rather than we're just not doing anything about it. I'd hate to see something slip through our fingers. Okay, so it's a very useful discussion. Again, very great paper. Phyllis, thank you for your undoubted grasp of detail. Well done. We certainly, hopefully, have indicated that we are keen to see, as with the other papers, this again coming in front of us. And Diane, for your point, that actually, Stephen, you'll pick up for the next meeting that we are a wee bit more specific about our recommendations. So at the moment, we're simply going to have the motion, which I'll put, that we receive the information. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Linda. I think I saw your hand in the background there. All those in favour, please use. Oh, sorry. No, look, we are. I was trying to be quick.
I just wonder whether you need some debate. You need some debate, Bruce. You should have debate.
I realise that. No, don't worry. It's coming at me from all angles. Is there any debate on the motion, please? Okay, I'll put them up.
Hang on. Sorry.
Diane, sorry.
I did want to add into debate, which I think I can do, even though I'm not a voting member. Look, I would. I support this, but I knowing how things can slip through the cracks, I would, and I don't think I can move. Officers maybe tell me, because I'm not on the committee, about moving a resolution that this committee receives a report back in a monitoring report back in 6 months.
Yes, we're comfortable with that.
What's that? Sorry, Stephen.
We're comfortable. Were you asking about adding that, or you moving that motion or incorporating that into the substantive?
Well, if you're comfortable in incorporating it in the substantive, but just, for me, it would be just good to sort of see that you're monitoring.
Yeah, we've noted it and we would do that, but if you want to incorporate it into the resolution, that's fine.
Well, can I get over? Can I look at? I appreciate your point. Can I just actually suggest that I would move that, and would like to do this as part of the total substantive motion, that management prioritise the recommendations and the timing, and develop the timing for reporting back to this committee for its approval. So what I'm trying to do there, Diane, is leave it open. I hear your point about the 6 months, but actually I'm thinking there might be a need for a report back earlier over some of these priorities. So what I'm trying to achieve there is that we ask management to prioritise, and secondly, develop a reporting timetable so we can get the response back on a timely basis.
That's fine.
Is that okay? So look, I know I'm probably going a bit over procedure here, but if I could therefore just treat this as one motion.
Yep.
We receive, and then we invite, or we ask management to prioritise and develop timing and come back to us with that. So if nobody's going to object too much to my slight barbarisation of process, I am going to again move that. Could I please have? I've got a seconder in the form of Linda. Again, I'll just check. Is there any discussion on the motion that I haven't heard? So Hetty's asked, am I comfortable with the wording? We request the manager prioritise and request they develop a reporting timeline for the committee's approval. Yes, I'm comfortable with that. Linda, you're my seconder. Are you happy with that? Linda? Yes, I take it you are. We've got a whole lot of greens going on here, so people are already voting. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. And if you are against, you can probably vote at the same time by putting your red X up. Oh, get up there. Why won't mine go up? There we go, mine's up. Rightio, I'll treat the motion as carried. Thank you very much. This is one of those interesting days. Okay, can we move please to the Internal Audit Charter? I suspect, Richard, you're going to lead off the batting on this, please.
Thank you, Chair. This charter is an update to the existing charter that we have for the Internal Audit, or now called the Assurance and Business Integrity Team, which is part of my wider team. Some of the changes are outlined in the paper, which are more alignment with our ways of working in council, and it also brings into the fold our role in conducting an integrity work plan. So it's a lot of it is technical updates, but some about the ways of working. We've looked across what other councils have in their charters, I think, and we have brought the best of what works for us into one document, and a short document, which is much easier to work with. Happy for Phyllis and I to answer any questions.
Thank you, Richard. Appreciate the clarity and simplicity of this document on one page. You can't beat it. Questions from the committee? There are none. Well, look, I'd just like to just indicate to the committee some of my thinking as I go through this with a couple of questions, please, Richard. I'm looking for two things out of this. One, that our internal audit function has the right mandate. Has it been asked to do the right thing? And the second part that I would want to ensure is that the internal audit function has the right independence and access to do their work unimpeded. And so I think the critical thing for members as they consider this reasonably simple document, and to me it's not bad, is that actually you are comfortable, given in light of the discussion we've had with the previous papers, that in fact this gives adequate mandate and adequate independence to Richard and Phyllis and team to do their work. So a couple of questions from me, nothing particularly significant, really just clarities, please, Richard. Could you just give me a sense of the integrity work that you do? Is this something that's new and therefore we've got to graft into the charter, or is this picking up on actually just normalising something that's been a systemic part of your internal audit function?
Phyllis has a hand up. I'm happy to defer to Phyllis on this and then add.
Oh, sorry, could have been Phyllis. Yes, sorry. No, sorry, Phyllis. Whoever. I'll take the lead, please.
Cool. Thank you, Chair. So this is more of a reflection of what we have been doing. So we have always been looking at protected disclosures and doing some form of integrity work around investigations. So this is more of formalizing what we are already doing into our charter, and also clarifying where we are essentially doing in some people might call it a second line role, as opposed to a pure internal audit function. So when we reviewed it, we thought it's best to be transparent to say this is actually what we're doing as part of our role, so that it's really clear and reflected in our charter.
Thank you. And the other question I had, which again was the second one, which is an addition, is there a need to mention the enterprise project management office for a particular reason?
Yes, the reason we mentioned that is because the EPM, the Enterprise Project Management Office, has recently been established. And so we just wanted to gain clarity about what the second line do as opposed to a third line. So I guess this is reflecting a point in time so that people are really clear about the various roles and responsibilities. And yeah, that's just reflecting around where the organization is at this stage. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. It's certainly something which will interest me because a clear emphasis on all councils, but I suspect importantly Wellington is on delivery, and your enterprise management office is actually a key part to that. And I think it's something which, from a risk perspective, will be something that will be of interest slightly further on. And the other thing then that I just wanted to reflect was its independence. And I just wanted to note for committee members, noting the final bullet point on the right-hand column, that we receive reports on all aspects of the function of the internal audit. I note with the qualification following due process. I think that's probably fair enough on those that are being reviewed, but that to me is important. And given this is my first meeting, I've already expressed to Richard, and I would like to do it in front of you, Phyllis. Firstly, all power from me to do your work. But secondly, I would value that we make certain that the reporting is, while necessarily subject to due process, is timely. And I think we've already agreed through the previous papers, we're going to talk about the assurance plan, we're going to talk about your annual audit plan, and even with things like the statutory stuff, the recommendation that you think about how you prioritise, because I'll be keen to see that we get that regular stuff coming through as prepared to generate good advice for us and good assurance that our mitigations are happening. Having said that, that's my bit. Thank you. I don't want to make a meal of what's a reasonably straightforward paper, but with those comments, is it, Phyllis, Richard, is there anything you'd like to say, or members, are there any other questions you'd like to ask before we move to the motion?
Just to point out, Chair, this is the approval of this charter is a responsibility of this committee, yes. So that's why it's confused. Yes. So
I appreciate that. This is actually one of those few times when we actually exercise a decision-making power, which is superb. Right, from the chair, I am going to move indeed those two options, which are that we receive the information, the staff members report, and most importantly, secondly, that we approve the internal audit charter. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Roy. Is there any discussion on the motion, please? There being none, I would ask you folk to, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please put up little green ticks, and those that are against, if you could put up your red cross, please, that would be great. Sweet. We're there, Hetty? Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Right, moving along, if we could then move to the strategic risk report for the 6 months. And again, I suspect I'm leaving this in the hands of Richard and Phyllis and team.
Thank you, Chair. This time it's myself and Kim, who's in the room with Phyllis. Kim's our risk manager.
All right. G'day, Kim. How are you?
She'll appear soon. But just before she starts speaking, we held a risk workshop, and many of the councillors here attended that on the 19th of August. So they're familiar with the risk framework, which is a much more tailored approach that we're bringing this year around. So it's tailored to the role of a council, and includes many different consequences that apply peculiar to council. So this report updates on the work we've done with the framework. It looks through the it reports on the rating of the 6 risks that have been assessed in detail. There are more that we had planned to do, but COVID interrupted. We will be working with the executive, and we're hoping to come back to members of this subcommittee to assess one or more of these risks, so you can have a practice with the framework to see the mechanics. But it's been well received, and I think we also have a couple of profiles that we're going to come to in the public excluded part of the meeting, where we can just check that this content is meeting the needs for the subcommittee. Kim, did you want to add something?
Thank you, Rich. Kia ora tātou katoa. I think you've summarised it really nicely, Rich. I guess the one thing I would say is that we had quite a good conversation on August 19th, Bruce, and about the method. So happy to follow up with you at another time so you can become more comfortable with this, and all the papers are available from that previous meeting. That's probably about it. We did have quite a good chat at the workshop, and at that workshop we really talked more about how we can meet the needs of this committee in terms of reporting and what level of detail and information that you require. So that's really the focus of the paper today, is to just re-summarise the results to date, but also say what is the level of information you need and in what formats, and putting forward the approach of a dashboard summarising all the threats and the risks associated with them, with this exception reporting at the highest level, but also those detailed profiles that provide the information about what are the risks and what we're doing about it, and how it's being reported and tracked to other committees and through other methods. So yeah, really interested to see what the feedback is from this committee over what your information needs are.
Thank you, Kim. That's a very good point. There was actually that specific request from that you've personalised, Kim, which is actually what do we need for our information? You've seen that, sorry, for your information, or our information needs, and that's in paragraph 9. We seek your feedback on whether these profiles, accompanied by the summary dashboards, provide you with sufficient clarity and detail. I wonder if perhaps we come back to at least specific feedback, because there are a couple of items in Public Excluded we should do, but if any generalised stuff on the dashboard at this stage, I would take that as well. So thank you for that, Kim. Thank you, Richard. I opened it up, and look, I'm sorry I didn't know who put their hand up first, but can I take it Iona first, then Diane?
Thanks, Bruce, but it was Diane who put her hand up first, so I'll wait.
Sorry, you're being very kind, Diane.
You go ahead, Iona, I don't mind. It's all right.
Okay, yeah, I don't want to jump the queue. Look, thank you for bringing this paper to the subcommittee. So 2 questions from me. Look, I've raised this before around the weighting of risks. So how will this be reflected when we see a matrix? So look, these are all significant issues, but climate change, earthquakes, for example, will have a very, very significant impact, much more significant than some of the other ones. And so I just wanted to understand how that would work, because we will have to prioritise, you know, everyone has to. And then the other question was, and I've been talking about it with Tam in our role as leaders of Puroa Amua, about then how this work flows into the committees, like, because we definitely do want to do some risk analysis. It's really important. I imagine the Infrastructure Committee would be particularly interested too. So I would just be interested to hear your thinking on that. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Councillor, through you, Chair. Yeah, I think we discussed this briefly at the briefing in August 19th around the weighting, but the approach really for the overall risk assessments and where those kind of ratings and scores come from is very much a maximum credible event scenario approach to try and think about what's the worst that could come from these particular threats. And there is no weighting involved in that. We're scoring against all the consequences that we've got listed in terms of democracy, health and safety, our big projects and programs, etc., to provide a very unbiased view of the quantum of the impacts that we could be faced. But where the weighting really comes in is around the risk management decision. So the actual scale of the event or the total consequences are part of the decision making around what is important and what should be weighted in terms of our decision making. But there's also, of course, what are the things that we just wouldn't tolerate as a council in terms of what are the things we really want to focus on. And for example, that might be health and safety or any kind of injury, or it might be financial, depending on the appetite of who's making the decisions about the risk management. So the weighting really comes into effect when you're thinking about what are the things that we really should be prioritising in terms of what we do about the risk, rather than how big is the risk itself, because that's just one part of the equation on what we do about it. And also it's what can we do about it. So one of those other examples might be supply issues is a really big risk for us in terms of contractors as well as resources, but there's less we can do about it, for example, than our poor planning or prioritisation. That's also a big risk. We've got a lot more control over that. So the weighting can come into account of what's within our influence as well as how big the impact could be and which areas do we want to focus on, because we don't have to just focus on the threat itself, we can focus on the impacts, which might be similar from a range of different threats. And your second question around how this flows into the committees. Well, I'm working with the people who are actually doing the risk management in other business units and other areas. So how I see this will work in the future if you approve the reporting approach is that these are a high level summary to provide you with assurance that the risks are being tracked and managed, and they will draw upon information that's going to other committees. And likewise, the people who are managing these risks or the various consequences will also be seeing these threat profiles and helping me to update those with their information. So it's kind of an information exchange. So I see these, what we'll be doing at our committee is almost providing that strategic lens that we have the systems and monitoring and reporting in place, that these risks are being managed and reported on, but likewise, the other committees or the other reporting that's going on from my colleagues will be providing a sense check that what we're reporting to you is correct and also up to date, and that we're capturing the work that they're doing. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Kim.
So yes, thank you. So I look forward to seeing that for the committees. I'm still not entirely convinced by the weighting around the risks. I see what you're saying, but I do think there must be some way of sort of, of giving, well, they've got different weights in different contexts, right? Obviously, if we don't plan properly, that can have significant impacts. And if we have a health and safety issue where someone is killed, then that's extremely serious. But I'm not quite sure about that. So maybe, look, I'll take that offline rather than taking up more time from the committee. Thank you.
Look, and I think, you've actually raised a really good question, and Kim, you've also given a very good answer. And it reflects the fact that we are in the middle of a process. That's clear to me. And actually, Kim needs our lead on what those weightings are, Iona. And actually, we as in governance are the only people that can provide that lead. So, for instance, obviously there's work still to be done around the targeted risk. That's actually going to start giving a very strong lead as to which really counts. And one of the roles of our committee, and it goes in part to your second question, is that our role is to take the broad look at this, not just a particular slice, which may or may not come up in front of a particular committee. We have to look at the overall risk weightings that are affecting us. It also raises, from a process perspective, in my view, the third point, which is actually in saying that governments are the ones that have to set the ratings primarily, which, we can take advice clearly from Kim. She'll give me good advice, I hope. Actually, we need to be able to talk about this with your other elected member colleagues as well. And this is where, as a subcommittee, we have to think about what is the communication we have with the totality of our colleagues, because actually this is a whole of governance discussion, as well as which can be directed and led by us as a subcommittee, but which needs to ultimately have the acceptance and approval of the whole council, because we are dealing here with exactly your original point. Not all risks are equal. Which ones do we have to really put effort into? Now, that might sound a bit platitudinal, but that's the work that I think is in front of us as a committee. Diane, I think you've got your hand up, please.
Yeah, and it's a nice segue into my questions, because it is about taking a broad approach. And how do you, how does the subcommittee, or how is it intended, this approach, that the subcommittee do look at these, the status of these risks? So I can see that the subcommittee is going to get assurance in the process and the structure and the framework and that. But what happens if, how do you monitor these? How, you know, I'm just curious to know how officers think this subcommittee is going to monitor these risks, and the frequency of that, how often that will happen, in terms of the forward program. And then leading on from the chair's comments, how do you then bring this back to a committee of a whole? Which is why then is one of the recommendations actually is to take this report to the committee of a whole, so that that all elected members understand the you know, what our strategic risks are, how are we tracking against them. I'm really interested to understand how you know, there's activities in play for each of the strategic risks. And how is progress against those activities being monitored and tracked, in particular by this committee? So yeah, I couldn't see it in the papers, and I couldn't see it in the forward program, is how this committee is actually going to monitor, you know, the status and progress against the strategic risks.
So the intention is that with the, I guess what I'd call it, the summary dashboard, that will have the risk status as well. And I guess with these big strategic risks, we wouldn't expect to see rapid change in the risk ratings. I mean, there might be an initiative that does make a difference that suddenly comes online. That would be great. But these are big and complex problems. So I don't think there's going to be a lot of change rapidly. However, the idea of the status reporting, of the dashboard reporting, will show the risk levels, any significant activity or change in risk level, and that will be coming each subcommittee. That's the frequency that we're suggesting. Happy to hear any feedback on that. I don't know if we'll get a lot of new information on changing risks more frequently than that, because there's a lot of information to collect across people, and saying, does this actually make a difference to the overall risk level? And it's going to take quite a big shift for things to actually change risk levels in some of these areas. There's some pretty sticky problems. So the intention is that the dashboard will have each of the 13 risks or the threats we've got there and their associated risk levels, and also change in those, and significant or exception reporting. There's been a big piece of work, or there's some new initiative has come online, and this has changed overall risk rating. In terms of the how this will feed up to the other subcommittees, perhaps Richard or Stephen could talk to that one rather than me, because that's a little bit out of my wheelhouse, I think.
Unmute. Yeah. Thanks, Kim. I just really wanted to talk briefly about, you know, some of the options for, you know, the specific committee considerations. One of the things that we are in the process of doing is reviewing our report format and bringing the risk management section into the body of the report. So one of the things that we could consider is against these high levels or top strategic risks, for those major papers that are coming through the committees, having a dialogue or a discussion in the paper about how each of these kind of risks or relevant risks might apply in the particular decision that's being made, because I think it's not quite been an afterthought, but it hasn't really been embodied, I don't think, within the advice. So where relevant, I think we can definitely add that into the particular items that are coming through each of the committees. As for, I guess, a particular committee discussion about some of these risks, we could map actually some of these risks to the terms of reference of the actual committees, and potentially have a more kind of detailed conversation within each of the committees. And I'm just thinking, for example, for climate change response, that's clearly within your committee, Iona, you know, in terms of the terms of reference. You could do a deeper examination of that, as opposed to what Bruce was saying, this committee is looking at the overall picture. In terms of getting the entire council to sign up to it, I think when we have completed these risks, and I do think that perhaps some other interaction at this subcommittee, whether it be a workshop or whether it actually be a formal item, and it probably has to be both. Once that profile and dashboard system has been signed up to, my advice would be to report that through to your committee, Diane, which this is a subcommittee of, and actually get the endorsement as an entire council body. Now, because it's a committee of the whole, whether or not that needs to go to council, it's a moot point. But I think once this committee has looked over it and is recommending, satisfaction with that risk profile, it could recommend that to finance and performance to endorse it or adopt it as a kind of a statement of how this committee sees things.
And just to add, in terms of reporting back to this subcommittee, there's a close link in with the work that Phyllis's team is doing in terms of assurance over the management of the strategic risks, some of them which are prioritised in her work plan. And I think the intention of the detailed profiles that Kim will be preparing is to report back by exception on those, so you won't be getting 13 large profiles each meeting to review.
Yeah, I suppose one of the things I'm looking at is also a number of the risks do cut right across. You could say fraud can occur. You might be sort of reported back up to finance. It could be, you could have fraud in some of the services, some of the infrastructure contracts. So it could cut across a number of different committees. And I wonder whether there is a risk in itself in fragmenting sort of that, taking that broad approach as well. So that's, I think, then that might be where Bruce was talking about. So I'm interested in making sure that things don't fall through the cracks, that there are strategic risks, and we do take a strategic view across the whole council, across the whole committees. And also for me is, some of these risks are very close to turning into an issue. And I think of one, I look at planning and prioritization. I think that is itself turning in, if you look at the agenda for the finance and performance meeting tomorrow, you could say that our planning and prioritization is now something that it could potentially be an issue. So, so I'm just, and it might be something that you have to go away and think about how it's best managed, so that as from a governance layer, we have, not only are we confident that we've got a good, robust system in terms of the framework, but also there's a monitoring system in place that's appropriate, so that if risks are starting to escalate or becoming issues, or combining 2 or 3 risks together and looking like it could be something really significant. So so I don't have the answer, but I just wonder whether there's a bit more work required of officers in that space.
I think just to reflect, we've got clearly it's the experience of this committee, but it's actually also the way we'll go, Diane, which is that Kim is quite right. We'll get quarterly reporting on all the strategic risks, and we will be weighing those up. And the most important part of it, we have a chance for discussion with the relevant risk owner, so that we will keep that high level review. But I want to reflect something which I think Stephen was hinting at in terms of your papers. Risk actually is just normal management. So if the individual committees of council aren't considering risk with each of their decisions, they're not doing their work. What we are doing is actually taking, and it's a trite phrase, but I'll use it, the helicopter view, and looking across all those risks. So we've got the start of it right. The real question is actually how do we keep on top of those risks, which is the next order of question. And certainly, Kim, I'll be very keen to explore that with you. so that we can fulfil our role properly for assurance. But we've got to start right, and obviously, as I said, we're in the middle of a process here, which we need to then graft into. But the important thing is that this committee, meeting roughly quarterly, 4 or 5 times a year, will get those quarterly updates, which is appropriate. The other thing which is really important is that actually, as Kim has said, our risks aren't necessarily going to significantly change. I mean, if the economy comes back in 6 months booming, we might suddenly, and world trade gets right, we'll suddenly find the shortage one suddenly drops off. But I know that health and safety will be with us forever and a day. So there is, around that target area, around the nature of defining what are the responses to mitigate those risks. Once that's properly populated for us, as we've got examples coming up and later in the agenda, that is actually going to give us a much stronger view that these risks are being managed. So we'll see how we go. Are there any other questions folk would like to make of this report, or advice to Kim about what they'd like to see? That's the case. Can I just say, from my experience, again, looking across a few councils, well done in your workshop on the 19th. The nature of the 13, I think it's 13, I think you said, Kim, you've come up with, are actually the right sort of nature of risks that I would expect for Wellington with my little bit of background knowledge. And that means if we build in an appropriate monitoring regime, we are probably hitting the right things. So at the first level of the high level sniff test, they pass that. So that's well done. I like the dashboard, Kim. I think as we, for instance, start to express what is our risk tolerance, where do we want to get to, that overall dashboard will be helpful, because actually we will take something like planning prioritisation, which at the moment is, to reflect your point, Diane, almost certain and it's severe. We'll want to show where we want to get it to, which presumably is somewhere lower and to the left. And so our target risk and this dashboard should show where we're trying to get to. So it gives us, again, the view about where we are heading in terms of risk. Can I move us, please, to the recommendations? There are 2 of them. Firstly, that we receive the information, and I think actually we could just change the second one to staff note the feedback provided on the risk profile and dashboard reporting approach. It needs to be in the past tense because we've had that chance for that discussion. Thank you for that, Hetty. So just with that slight amendment, I'm going to suggest again that we just treat it as the substantive motion. We note the feedback provided. Sorry, the staff, I should say, Hetty, note the feedback provided. I will put that motion. Do I have a seconder, please? Just waiting to see. Could you out your name, please, because I can't see everybody on the board at the moment. Oh, thank you, Liz. Appreciate that. Welcome. Good to see you there. So Liz has seconded that. Is there any discussion on the motion? There being none, if you are for the motion, can you please put your little green tick up on the screen? If you want to vote against it, can you put the little red cross? Thank you. Brilliant, and we'll let Hetty take the picture. Are you okay? Thank you very much for that, and appreciate your input, Kim. Obviously, very keen that we hear regularly from you at our ongoing meetings. Thank you for that, Richard and Stephen as well. Right, if we could move to our next item, is action tracking. I think there were 13, is it 13 matters? I forget the number now, that were there. Who's speaking to this? Sorry, I should have checked that one out. Stephen, this is you.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. This report, and this just probably for your information, is a new kind of way of reporting back to the committee those decisions that have been made previously, and just an indication of whether they're where they're at, basically. So the other members of this committee will be familiar with it, because that's something we've implemented since the governance review and the new committee structure. I think where we've got status no action required, mainly that's because they're either noting or receiving recommendations. There's only one in there where and it relates to the audit plan was delegated to the CFO and Mayor to finalise the audit fees letter. I think I'm not sure if Sarah's still online. She could have answered that. Otherwise, we can update the committee offline. But there's no action required by this subcommittee. It's in train.
My question, Stephen. I have Sarah right behind me, so she can tell me that's been done. How's that? She's putting a thumb up, so I'm going to take that as a key thing. Look, it is important that we dot I's and cross T's. And Diane, look, just to reflect your previous comment or a couple of papers ago, I think I take the point that if we look carefully at our resolutions going forward, it may mean that we've got a more meaningful action sheet as we follow through on what we've been done here. So thank you. I know you've said you'd take it on board, Stephen, as you frame up recommendations going forward, and we can see this as being more meaningful. Are there any questions of Stephen on the action sheet as we stand at this stage? It's great to have a clean one for the first time. We'll see if we can add to that as we go into the next committee meetings. I sense there's no need to hold questions longer at this stage. Can I move to the recommendation, please? Which is on page 54, which is that we receive the information, which I will move. Do I have a second to please shout your name out? Oh, who's got their hand up? Thank you, Roy. I saw yours hand up first. Thank you for everybody else that put their hand up as well. Again, if sorry, any discussion on the motion? Could I please ask you then, green ticks for and red ticks against, please. If you can, I can't actually get my reaction up. Yes, I can. 4 green ticks against with red. 80, how are we going there? Thank you, brilliant. Appreciate that. Right. So I'm at the point then of looking at the forward audit program. Reasonably small paper at this point. Stephen.
Yeah, thanks again, Chair. A bit like the last report, this is an addition for all of our committees looking at the forward agenda. And look, I'm conscious of your comments, Chair, about wanting to get across and look at an annual forward program. So this is this particular meeting is really an off-cycle meeting in terms of it's not in line with our quarterly meetings, and it's to accommodate principally the audit for the annual report. But we have got 2 other items there: the management letter in terms of the audit of the LTP, which we're basically, I'm not sure whether we've received it yet from Audit New Zealand. If we haven't, it's very shortly, and we need to work through that, and that'll come back to this subcommittee. And a summary of the enterprise risk maturity survey results, which is something that the team's been working on. And you know, principally, I'm saying that this committee meeting was really all about the annual report, but with the meeting, it's opportune to tuck those other 2 items on this agenda. But really happy to work with you, Chair, in terms of the for the annual program, and you know, we've already had a bit of a chat about that. So you'll see that coming through probably. Well, we could do it actually potentially at that next meeting or the one after. More of an annual program approach.
Thank you, Stephen. In fact, I have Stephen's quite right, and I do appreciate the fact that management have given me a wee release to express 1 or 2 views. In fact, I've been more aspirational. I said I want a 3-year program. So we'll bring that to the committee. I'll be very keen for the committee to see that. And I think it's also a way, Stephen, in which we can also start to flesh out one or two of the discussions we've had in some of the other papers, particularly the risk one around how we monitor risk going forward. But that's for when you and I have a chance to sit down with a program and see where we go to. The critical point is 12th is focused really primarily on the annual report. We'll pick up a couple of extra things as we go through. But I hear the point that it'll be the summation of the two meetings we're having now and then getting into the annual report proper. Can I just stress again, I put Stephen and Baz under a bit of pressure to say, well, I'd like to know more how we actually do that to make certain we have an appropriate process to actually receive the annual report. So we'll see how we go. Any questions people like? Diane, you're there.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'm really, because I just thank you for clarifying that, Bruce, because I think it is a forward program and there's a lot of things that can be scheduled in, even if it's not the complete program per meeting over the next 12 months. But the purpose is, it says that it provides the forward program for the next two meetings. And I just wondered, but actually it's only got the papers for the next meeting. So was that just a slip up?
Yes. Purpose, Stephen. Two meetings. Oh, thank you, Diane. I picked it up earlier on.
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, we want to discuss that with Bruce,
okay.
And that's why we kind of held back on that next meeting, given that we were fairly confident that we would get some good feedback from this particular meeting, and we didn't really want to lock that in until we've taken into account what was said today and had the chance to talk to Bruce.
Okay, so can I just ask officers, is it possible, and with the subcommittee's approval, that there is a conversation with finance and performance, because obviously some of the papers will come up to finance and performance, and I think making sure that things are tied well together. And I just would note that you've got this meeting today, and then we've got finance and performance tomorrow. So a sort of straight after. And I just wonder whether the closeness is ideal, because if this subcommittee makes recommendations or something, whether there's enough time sometimes for officers to get further information than to help report up to finance and performance. So I'm just raising that point.
Yes, and I do wonder whether, in terms of our forward agenda, we deliberately highlight any papers or any items that are actually coming through to your committee, Diane, so that there's visibility of that. In terms of the timing of this meeting vis-a-vis yours, it's something we could look at, although I think all of those meeting times are pretty much locked in for the remainder of this calendar year, but it's something that we can talk to Jennifer Parker about.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Very good point. I'm very keen that we work in. That's with your committee. It's important. Are there any other discussion points people would like to raise? There being none, can I just move to the recommendation, which is simply that we receive the information. We've also heard some other stuff around it, which has got a wee bit of responsibility on my shoulders. So look, I'd like to move that we receive the information. Do I have a seconder, please? I think I saw your hand, Linda. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Again, if you could go to the reactions, green tick for accepting the motion. Oh, sorry, is there any discussion on the motion? Get the process right. Green tick for the motion, red cross, please, if you're against it. All those in favour, please put the green tick up. I'll treat that as carried. Thank you very much. Right, if you move to the procedural motion, please, on page 62. We have two matters that we will deal with in terms of public excluded for the reasons that are set out, both in terms of section 48 and section 7.2 of the Local Government Official Information and Meeting Act. I will put that motion. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Jenny. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Can I just quickly speak to it?
Yes, please, Jenny.
Just to note that it is not the intention that all of these risk schedules will be treated in public excluded. It's that these two in particular, it was the view of staff that they needed to be public excluded because they're essentially looking at malicious actors in the community, essentially. So we don't, if we're talking about our risk response to an earthquake, we don't need to worry that the earthquake is going to change its tactics to take account for our response. But for these two particular ones, we do, there was concern about that. So just to assure you that this is unusual, that these will be treated in public excluded, and we expect that most of these will normally come in the public meeting.
Thank you, Jenny. I think that's a really important point, and I certainly understood the rationale behind that for these two. It would make sense at this point, at least they're in public excluded. Any other questions or comments on the motion? There being none, I will. Oh, sorry, Iona.
Thanks, Bruce. You also know that I'm very keen on transparency, and generally vote against public excluded issues. Look, I think it's fair enough here. I looked at some of the content, and I'm very pleased to see it come to committee. And I think it's helpful that it was mentioned in a previous paper. So I just would like us to be very clear in our public communications that we are taking these threats seriously. They are very significant, obviously, and to give confidence that we are taking a proactive response. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. And look, can I just again affirm my support for council? Obviously, it's practice, Iona, that it is open and transparent about its risks, and I totally take that on. I also take on board your advice that we treat and take those things in the public excluded carefully, and not in any attempt to defeat transparency, or indeed, as the Ombudsman would say, matters that might be embarrassing. That doesn't mean to say you can go into public excluded. I think there is probably some sensitivity around the types of controls, for instance, we have, or the actions we're taking around cybersecurity, which quite frankly should not be in the public knowledge. Otherwise, we're opening ourselves to greater vulnerability. Right, with that, I'll put the motion again. If you could use your reaction button, please, to green uptick, or red cross if you are against it. Thank you. I think you're smiling, Roy. Oh, you are.